Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear student, this is actually the content of week number 3. And week number 3 and week number four are actually are the same. We will discuss one part in week number 3 and the other part in week number 4. So the first part is the history of merger and acquisition. So in third week we will discuss the history of merger and acquisition being and the activity practice over the years in the in the world. And in the second part we will discuss other aspects of merger, for like planning for merger and acquisition activities, and what would be the first steps regarding when you are planning to acquire or merge with other firm or other firm. So this part will specifically related to history of merger and acquisition. Starting with historical overview or evolution of merger and acquisition activity, as we all know that merger and acquisition is actually a expansion activity, or when the company want to grow grow their business, so they indulge in these kind of activity. When we look into the detail, or when we look into the historical evaluation of merchant acquisition activity, so these activity shows a very cluster patterns, and these clusters are actually known as waves, and they occur in burst interspersed with relative inactivity. um, and obviously when we talk about merger waves, economics usually refer to 5 specific waves starting from 1890. The length and start of each wave is not specific. When you cannot say that when these started or when there was when what is the specific date of starting it, but and what is the activity, or you can say the length of the activity. But it is sure that the end of each wave usually fall when a major war or beginning of economic recession, crisis, or any kind of economic distress occur. Furthermore, the first and second waves are very much active in US economy, in US market, while the other waves are more geographically dispersed. As when we see the second and in the third wave, so third wave was shows that there was a large activity in US, UK, and continental Europe, but additionally this was also significantly increased activity in the Asian region as well. Starting with the wave number 1, and the period of this wave is from 1893 to 1904. The actually this wave started with the period of economic expansion, as an important characteristic was that there was a simultaneous consolidation of manufacturers within one industry. This within one industry consolidation led to horizontal consolidation of major industries and created first giants, majorly in the oil, mining, and steel industry. There were other merger as well, but majority of these mergers are done within the same kind of industry, same kind of businesses. And this is the phase in which the great monopolies were created, and the first wave was also characterized by friendly deals and actually by the cash financing. Having said said this, we still do not know why the merger wave started in the first place. In the first place, the laws on incorporation were evolving and were implemented more rigorously at the end of 19th century. Before proper legislations, entrepreneurs had an unlimited liability on their asset, which means that growth of their company also means greater exposure and to a greater risk. Improvement of laws on a corporation led to the limited liability and for the businessmen and entrepreneurs. Furthermore, economic expansion and development of different modern capital markets and majorly the improvement of stock exchange, New York Stock Exchange, also boosted the number of mergers because capital needed to acquire or merge become more accessible. All these things actually give rise to different kind of merger and acquisition activities. But the major significance of this time period is that there were horizontal mergers, and secondly, large monopolies were created due to horizontal mergers. Thirdly, majority of these mergers were friendly deals, and these deals were done because there were improved laws of incorporations, and the people were actually in the development of a modern capital market lead to the limitation of liabilities. This is also that was also actually fueled, or can say that help into the expansion of these kind of activities. But the end of this first wave come due to rigorous enactment of new antitrust laws. For example, the Sherman Antitrust Laws Act. Beside this, the stock market crash around about 1905, which resulted in a period of economic stagnation, and further the beginning of, or the threat of, the First World War was also pointing as a cause of the end of the first identified wave, which is also known as the Great Merger Wave. The first wave is also called as the Great Merger Wave, but this comes into an end before a world war, because before the world war there were a certain kind of economic stagnation and certain activities which created end of this wave. Now wave number second, as we have discussed that the first wave ended around about in 1904 due to First World War. So the second merger wave was started in 1910, where the primary focus of merger activities was in the food, paper, printing, and iron industry. But the wave was significantly smaller in magnitude than the first wave, where the first wave exceeded more than 15% of the total asset in the US market. The second wave had an impact of less than 10%. And the second wave followed after the First World War in the times of economic recovery, and increased concern was about monopoly power as opposed to the first wave. This wave characterized itself as the creation of oligopolies, in which a few companies joined together in order to create a kind of a monopoly. But this is not a monopoly, it is an oligopoly. So at the end of the wave, industries were no longer dominated by one large corporation, but rather by two or more, especially small companies which survived the previous wave were active on the merger and acquisition market. So the objective of these companies was to gain economies of scale, so that they were better equipped against the power of previous monopolists. So logic behind the emergence of oligopolies is the merged companies of the previous wave were faced with restricted resources due to the previous crisis and greater enforcement of antitrust laws, especially the Sherman laws. So similar to the first wave, the it was also it was actually a friendly kind of activity, and there were no hostile acquisition or merger acquisition. So the friendly characteristic of the deal, but the prevalent source of financing switched from cash to equity. So the end of the second wave was caused by the market crash of 1929, which started the period of Great Depression, which led to the worldwide depression in the following year. So that in roundabout after 1930, there was a period of Great Depression in the whole world, and there was extreme deflation in the market. But that was the period in which there were conflict between the countries, and later on that also developed different other adverse kind of activities. So this is the period in which this is the period is called as the Great Depression, and this period, before this period, the second wave actually ended up in 1929. Now, third wave started in 1955, and after the heart of wave number second, which actually ended up in 1929, the two major events, that is the Great Depression. That is a period. Then there is the economic activities were at their lower ebb. The majority of countries are indulge in saving of different currencies and golds, and so there was extreme deflation in the inflation. After that, there was start of Second World War. That is also a period of great distress, in which majority of activities were related to war and war weapon generation, etc. So after the Second World War, the reconstruction activity started, and there was a concept of cooperation and coordination, which gave rise to third wave. And the other reason which give rise to this wave is that many anti-comparative merger and acquisition laws were restriction and laws were introduced in order to curb these anti-comparative activities of merger and acquisitions. And and as we have studied that in the first and the second wave, the majority of collaboration and merger and acquisition activities were related to the vertical and horizontal integration in the same industries. But this wave gave rise to the concept of diversification, and diversification is the type of activities in which the companies were involved in collaboration or indulge and or developing a portfolio of businesses in different industries. So that concept were evolved in this period. Secondly, the major source of financing was equity, because of the strengthening of your capital market or creation in the capital markets. So the major source was equity financing, and the diversification type was the development of conglomerates. That means that many businesses were involved in portfolios in which they have, which is their portfolio of businesses which are not surely related to each other. So in order to exploit different opportunities in different industries. And additionally, in conglomerates, they actually create their own internal capital market, which is very useful when the capital market was the outside capital market is very expensive. So thirdly, it should be understand that as the conglomerate was introduced and conglomerate were practiced in the market, the whole market structure change. But change, and obviously when there is a change in the market structure, so there were certain other practices were being done in the market. But and then there were actually the risk was eliminated less for these kind of businesses, because if at one industry they are facing problems, so they can invest in the other business in which they can exploit that opportunities. But as this concept was a new one, besides certain advantages, there were many limitations, or you can say many problem which evolved. Firstly, as the diversification was introduced, there were increased distance between the managers and the headquarters of different division manager, because there are these portfolios are portfolios are actually large, and these have a bunch of unrelated businesses. So obviously you have different divisions, you have different managers, so there is actually a line of communication was very inefficient, and besides that there were actually many decisions which have to be taken by the headquarters, and because due to their involvement in different line of businesses, they can face problem, because every industry have particular kind of problems, particular kind of scenarios, so they have to consider that thing. So that was actually a very complicated type of decision that company headquarters at a or the corporate level of the companies have to taken. So if we see that these there were the problems, but whatever the case is, that we can say that the third wave was started due to strict enactment of antitrust laws, which increased diversification and help in building the empire, and faces a problem, but as well they have different advantages. But it's clear that the third wave in the third wave, the percentage of corporate activities in unrelated businesses increased from 9% to 21%, and mostly were done in the companies which are in the Fortune 500 companies. So so it's I can say that diversification played a very key role in the third wave. But the third wave also collapsed at the end of 1970, and in 19 end of the 1970s, and in 1980, and collapsed completely in 1981, when there was a start of economic recession because of the oil crisis. So majority of companies, the majority of the activities which are actually related to merger and acquisition were halt, and were halt, and the economic recession started. After the close of wave 3, which almost ended up in 1979 due to oil crisis and certain economic distress situations, the fourth wave started in 1984, and almost in 1980. This wave is almost different from the other waves, because the previous three waves were kind of friendly merger and acquisition activities, but over here most of the bids were hostile nature, which meant that the bid did not have the target management's approval. Secondly, the size of the target bid was significantly larger than in the previous wave, and according to many researchers, the financing source which were dominant in this wave was equity to debt and cash financing. So this wave is actually called as a bargain hunt by a well-known researcher, Ravenscraft, in 1987. So it taken place, and it has been a bargain hunt which was been taken place in depressed stock market, where the conglomerates of the previous wave divested their divisions. As the previous wave, which was wave 3, there were the most dominant trend was the creation of conglomerate. But in this way, in this situation, in this wave, the majority of these conglomerate were divested, and therefore divestors constitute about 20 to these divestors actually constitute about 20 to 40% of the M&N activities. Apparently there was a simultaneously expansion and downsizing of business, where the expanding corporation made use of divestiture to increase their competitive position. Obviously, there was a situation which was created by the third wave, in which diversification was very dominant, and diversification were done in different unrelated businesses, and majority of companies were very much indulged in the activities in unrelated businesses. But in this wave, because there were a very poor economic situation due to oil crisis and other economic distresses, so in that case there was actually a situation in which majority of conglomerates were actually selling or divesting their different divisions which were weak, actually we have discussed this thing in the portfolio, when the company develop their portfolio. So in order to be in the market, in order to improve themselves, there are certain conditions in which the companies divest or sell out various of its divisions which were not very prominent. So on one hand, many conglomerate were selling or divesting their businesses which were not very productive. On the other hand, there were businesses which were trying to purchase those businesses in order to put their effort into to improve those businesses and make those businesses valuable for there. So the new merger wave, as one, it is actually characterized by bust up takeovers where larger part of the target were divested after acquiring. Beside these bids bust up, the concept of leverage buyout emerge. Leverage, in a leverage buyout, the leverage buyout is actually a situation in which own management uses large amount of outside debt to acquire the company. After acquisition, large fraction of the assets were sold, as was the case with the bust up takeover. So the fourth wave started to eliminate inefficiencies that were created by the conglomerate measures in the third merger wave. So that it shows that in 1980s, a bid on target firm which is competing in the same industry has a positive relationship with stock market returns for the shareholders of the bidding firm. For bid on unrelated targets, the opposite holds. This indicated that the market had negative attitude towards unrelated diversification, a strategy appreciated in third merger wave. So that means that these actually conditions in which these conglomerate were not being welcomed in the fourth wave, and in 1989, and these the third, which were actually previously appreciated in the third wave, but these were not appreciated in the fourth wave. So after 1989, these merger and acquisition activities of the fourth wave gradually slowed down, and another stock market crash led to the end of this wave. So this, in 1989, the market crash resulted in the ending of this fourth wave of merger and acquisitions activity. After the collapse of wave 4, which was actually due to economic distress in 1899, in the 1990s was actually a time period in which economic activity were resuming, and the financial markets were booming, and globalization, the process was developing. So this is the wave in which majority of activity were related to globalization, international businesses. So the merger activity also boomed in continental Europe, where it also equaled the US market. Due to globalization, many cross-border merger acquisition took place, and because everyone want to keep up with the global economic activity, and they want to grab the global opportunities, and they want to actually find their economic opportunities beyond their borders, and they are targeting firms or companies which are in the other geographical area and not in the domestic in the domestic area. So the growth was an important driver. So in this case, this was in this actually activity, the major driver was growth, and this growth were actually directed towards international markets. So corporation wanted to participate in the globalization of the economy. This created mega deals that were unthinkable before the wave. So some when we see this mega deals, so the examples are Chrysler and Daimler-Benz, Exxon, Mobil, Citibank, and Travelers. So these were the major large deal which were not being think before these they happened. And the fifth wave actually started because of the technological innovation wave, and the boom of information technology was the major driver in this case. So, and refocus of corporation on their core competency to gain comparative advantage. This resource-based view leads to a better focus on gain a sustainable comparative advantage, and through the best use of their resources and capabilities. As if you look at the total scenario or total trends which are being taking place. So firstly, there was a trend of globalization, and secondly, the growth motive was there. Their motive was to grow their businesses, and thirdly, the technological wave was actually another thing which actually, due to which information technology and were actually supportive in developing the core competency and gaining the comparative advantage for different firms. But whatever the cases, these are the major driver of the third wave, the fifth wave. But the nature of merger was prevalently friendly, and the dominant source of financing was equity. And but the this wave end up in 2000. That is actually start of the new millennium. So because the beginning of the new millennium started with the burst of internet bubble, causing global stock market to crash. So that was actually the fifth wave, which ended up in 2000 at the end, the start of the millennium, which caused this to end up. And after that, there was another activity which we will discuss in the next slide. Okay, the whole of this presentation is developed and is based on different research papers. In majority of research papers, we see the previous five waves, but as that the fifth wave ended up in 2000, there are actually other waves. There are certain activities which occur beyond that time period. So I searched other latest research papers, and I found that there are two other waves after that, the sixth and the seventh wave. So as this sixth wave started in the new millennium, because due to millennium bug and other different activities, the fifth wave was halted. So the start of this sixth wave is when the companies or the businesses were recovering from the recession of 2000, or it's a temporary recession which was created due to millennium bug. And these actually this start of this wave was due to the introduction of lower interest rates by the Federal Reserves or by the State Bank. And because these low interest rates were the stimulus to the economy. And they actually, not only that, these lower interest rate also contributed into the rise of private equity funds, as leverage acquisitions become cheaper and the stock market was booming. So this actually lead to the availability of large amount of capital, and the environment was very favorable for merger and acquisition activities. The Alexandros in 2012, he actually developed different behavioral theories regarding merger and acquisition, and he stated that at that time merger when overvalued firms merger occurs when overvalued firms seek to acquire less overvalued asset. And and they claim, and also they claim that during that period the stock were not overvalued, and because their prices were according to the true fundamentals, and because the expectation was not over optimistic. So based upon that, they developed different valuation models and gather data and prove their points. We can rightly say that the most important reason of the development of this wave, the sixth wave, was the availability of large amount of liquidity available at that time. So but another researcher that is named as Corderio in 2014, he suggests that the high liquidity and cheap capital generated distortions, and target companies ended up being overvalued due to enormous speculation and the lack of detected risk from directing a large volume of resources to different kind of bad assets. So these might be the reason, say, because these researchers actually worked on different datas and worked on different in different areas. But whatever the case is, they were actually both agreed on this point, that this wave ended up in 2007, because investors and corporate managers start becoming very much skeptical of the different mortgage-backed securities, and obviously the credit market. So in because too much capital was taken out, and too much investment were being done. This was the case in which the credit would dried up, and the credit the financing agencies, or you can say financial institutions, have very scarce funds available. So this lead to another period of recession, that is actually period of 2008, in which the whole world faces a kind of economic recession. So obviously this halted the activities of sixth wave. The sixth wave ended up in 2008 due to a recession. But as we know that after recessionary period, the economies try to recover their losses and increase. And when we see in the sixth wave, there was gradually decrease in interest rates. But in this period, the major driver of this period is that interest rate was starting to increase. Secondly, the capital market was very strong because the stock prices were at their historical high, and the unemployment rates were actually at its lower end, that is actually 3.7%, and the job opening exceeds the number of unemployment in America by more than 6,50,000. So if we look at the Deloitte reports of merger and acquisition trends in 2018, it states that the companies or corporations are spending more on firepowers. Companies say that their cash level has actually increased, and the merger and acquisition activity remains the number one intention use of these funds. So technology acquisition is the number one driver of merger and acquisition pursuit in this time period. And they are actually managers are actually not very biased towards are not very unbiased towards vertical integration, especially in different kind of life sciences, healthcare, technology, and financial services. um, and according to New York Times, there was a fear of the Silicon Valley's fear that growing ambitious helped to drive a record run of merger acquisition activities, with more than $2.5 trillion mergers announced during the first half of 2018. In addition to 4 of the 10 biggest deals done during that period, were made in part to fend off competition from the largest technologies companies, as the value of acquisition announced during the first half of 2000 increased 1861% from the same time in 2017. So companies are turning to merger and acquisition in order to capture greater market share and change their business models in order to battle companies such as Netflix, Amazon, and other technological companies who are currently trying to enter new industries. Along the same lines, a number of large deals have been in the media and healthcare industry as well, industries that are having to battle technology and encroachment upon their territories. Large media firms are now having to compete with companies like Netflix by owning both their content and the platform on which it is provided. And healthcare companies must respond to the companies like Amazon, who are trying to enter the healthcare business. So there are continuous war going on, and competition is there. Every company try to grab the market share. So this wave is now in its continuous process, and it is actually in a continuous thing. So this wave is the current wave, or wave of merger acquisition, is seventh wave, which is now continuing, and continue till any other recession will start. Now, as we have gone through merger and acquisition activity and the historical evaluation of merger and acquisition activity over, in different areas and in the whole world. But if we look at these kind of activities in Pakistan, so we can see the merger and acquisition activity being practiced in this mostly the same industry that are actually called as horizontal mergers. And if you look into the details, so they are all mostly confined to the multinational firms. But now different financial sectors have practiced this thing, this phenomena, as we can see different merger and different activities in leasing and Modarba companies, as in 2000, July 2002, Security Leasing Corporation Limited announced proposed merger with Lease Park Limited. And because there is a large paid up capital requirement for banks and leasing companies, and so these amalgamation in these two sector is imminent, and already there are many reports that we can see that these leasing companies are practicing merger and acquisition. Apart from that, insurance sector also is has also may follow pursuit in order to meet minimum capital adequacy requirement. But as the textile sector, which is actually handles almost 60% of Pakistan's exports, it's very beneficial for this sector to practice merger and acquisition activities. And there are in case of leasing corporation, National Development Leasing Corporation announced merger with IFIC Bank, which is a Bangladesh banks. And recently there has been a proliferation of merger and acquisition activity in pharmaceutical industry as well, because these are multinational companies. Boots, a UK company, merged with Besaf, a German company, and Welcome Pharmaceutical, a UK based company, merged with Glaxo Pharmaceutical. SK&F with Beecham, and Knoll Pharmaceutical Limited announced amalgamation with Abbott Laboratories Limited. So there are activities being this activity is being practiced in Pakistan, but still the many this has to be there has there this kind of activity should be accelerated and should be practiced in different sectors and industries, because there are many sick units in Pakistan, and it's a very big problem for Pakistan. So these can be these sick units can be merged with good productive units where feasible, like for example Corporate Industrial Restructuring Corporation, that is CIRC, can be a great help in this kind of activity. And because a substantial tech transaction can be availed which allows accumulation losses of sick industrial units to be set off against acquirer's income in the year of acquisition and 2 years follows. So this if the companies high productive companies merge with sick units, say they'll get this tax advantage as well. So this kind of activities should be practiced in Pakistan in order to get the benefit of efficiencies of this kind of activities.